Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, and for some, good late afternoon. Thank you for joining our first annual Simpli5 Leader Summit. Super excited to have you all here, and I hope that all of you are really going to enjoy the content that you hear today. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our founder and CEO, Karen Gordon, who's going to be kicking things off and kind of helping frame what the next couple hours is going to look like. So Karen, over to you.
Thank you, Tyler. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Simpli5 Leader Summit. As Tyler said, I'm Karen Gordon. I'm the CEO and founder of 5 Dynamics. We're here today to learn from each other. We're here today as big thinkers, creative problem solvers, and thought leaders. We're here today because we want to inspire empathy, remove bias, and create unity. At home, at work, and in the world, there's no doubt that it's been a difficult couple of years for all of us and that we're all feeling it at work. According to the latest Gallup poll, in the second quarter of 2022, they found that the proportion of engaged workers remained at 32%. However, the number of actively disengaged workers increased to 18%. That's a 1.8 to 1 ratio, which is the lowest in almost a decade. The news is grim, but the opportunity is huge. You are uniquely positioned to change the way that people work. You can rewrite the playbook and create an inspired and inclusive workforce, but it will take all of us thinking differently. According to Josh Bersin in his HR Predictions 2022 report, of all of the L&D issues that companies face, one of the hottest of all is power skills. Teaching people how to lead, teaching people how to work in teams, how to collaborate, how to communicate, how to tell stories, and how to think strategically. We are going to hear from speakers today who address all of these areas. So we've brought together just a few of the incredible people in our network. And they're making huge strides in the way that we engage with one another while building real business value. All of our speakers were chosen because they bring original ideas that are making a big impact, but also because they want to make the world a better place than they found it. In addition to focusing on big ideas and workforce trends, you will also learn about the best practices and multiple applications of the 5 Dynamics methodology. And these applications are creating higher levels of engagement, stronger leadership development, and inspired collaboration. I want to thank the 5 Dynamics team and all of our incredible speakers for giving so generously of their time. Due to their efforts, you are in for a great day filled with connection and learning. Here's just a little bit about today's logistics. The first 3 speakers will be on this Zoom webinar. All of our sessions will include a time for a lively Q&A. You'll simply just need to type your questions at the bottom of the Zoom in the Q&A section, and one of our MCs will share your questions with the speaker. If we don't have time to get to all of your questions during today's session, don't worry, we'll do our best to come back to your questions and respond to them after the session is over. We're beginning our day all together in this one webinar, but after this webinar, we'll break into 3 distinct tracks: healthcare, technology, and learning. However, each and every speaker will be offering valuable insights that cross over all boundaries. So if you want to move from one track to the next, feel free to do so. For example, in our learning track, we have Dr. Ed Haynes who's going to be speaking, yet the application that he's speaking of is actually the corporate application at WGU. So don't worry, there'll be something for everyone. And again, just feel free to go from track to track. The best way to do that is to go back to the lobby and then select the program that you would like to listen. We hope that you'll be able to stay with us for the entire day. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you being here with us today, and we're looking forward to a great day ahead. We'll also have the opportunity to be able to share some of what we're learning today. Simply use the hashtag Simplify Summit 2022. Now let's gear up for our first speaker and get ready for a great day ahead. Our first speaker had a long and storied career as a technologist. He worked successfully in startups and in some of the world's largest corporations, but his passion was around creating opportunities for all. He grew tired of the lip service that was being given to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives that were not moving the needle at all. So he sat down one day and he put together a plan stating what he would do differently. And he sent that plan to the CEO of his 60,000 plus employee company. The CEO was so impressed with this plan that he created a new role for him that was focused on leading these initiatives. This led to a shift in his career, but it also led to creating opportunities for thousands of people who might otherwise never had a seat at the table. Having grown up in South Central LA during the Rodney King riot years, his life is a testament to what can be achieved with hard work if you're given that one opportunity. He believes in not only training individuals for these opportunities, but giving them the opportunities once they move into the workforce. And his research shows that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is not a nice to have, it's a business imperative. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend and an all-around great guy, Mr. Brian Reaves.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
You sound good, Brian.
Awesome, yep. Awesome. I'm going ahead, share. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. Scrambling. I'm actually dialing in here from Orlando, Florida at another conference. So apologies here, but if let me know if you can see the screen and we'll jump into the story. Thank you so much, Karen. It's a great privilege to be here. And thank you for the wonderful introduction there. Can you see my screen?
Yep, slides look good. It's full screen. Take it away,
Perfect.
Brian.
Thank you so much. So a little bit about me. Karen shared a little bit about it, but I wanted to double click a bit on the background to give some grounding as to the why, as Karen spoke about. I made that pivot in the career. So born many moons ago, I hate this slide because it does date me a bit, but was born in the 60s in a place called South Central Los Angeles, which is in the shadow of the Coliseum. Socioeconomically deprived area back then. That's a sort of $1,000 word to say we were poor. In fact, our joke family-wise is we were actually P-O, because we couldn't afford the O-R. But quite honestly, through the love of my family and all of their investment in me, everything changed for me. I was able to attend UCLA, graduated with degrees in math and computer science. And went on to that career that Karen spoke about as a technologist, first starting as an intern in Xerox, then starting as a full-time career in Xerox, which opened up my world being in the Silicon Valley for over 20 years, doing fun things around innovation. That said, always remember where I came from, a lot of Brian Reaves with humble beginnings. And throughout my entire engineering career, I always was looking for opportunities for other people. And it just wasn't Black young men coming from Los Angeles, but people who I would sort of term as the have-nots, because there's certainly in a world of 8 billion people, a lot of people with the will to be haves, and they just need to be given opportunities. So that was my side hustle for a good part of my career as well. And then formally, as Karen said, in 2016, had the great opportunity at SAP at the time and rose to the challenge of the CEO, Bill McDermott at the time, is to take on a new role outside of technology. And quite honestly, as you'll see in the presentation here, my mindset still is an engineer. I think of this topic as a complex human business problem. And I think it needs the same rigor in the approach, as you'll see. So I stayed at SAP for a while, then another year and a half later, got the great opportunity to work for Michael Dell at Dell Technologies, because that was an opportunity to take it from a 60,000 person company to a 165,000 person company, the great experiment. And that's where I honed a lot of the tactics and strategies that I'll speak to you today about. And then about 18 months ago, I had the honor and privilege to join UKG, a leading HCM, human capital management and workforce management company, and to lead the topic from scratch here. So that's a little bit about my background. I have a lot of passion for the topic and excited to share some of those thoughts with you. So first thing I typically do is when you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, those are words, and sometimes people confuse what they mean, or do they mean the same? So I'll at least level set here, and the first four bullets here are actually the sort of Merriam-Webster dictionary of what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging mean. But there's a person in my space named Verna Myers, and at the time she was the inclusion strategy lead at Netflix. She made a famous quote in our industry, which is diversity is being asked to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. But since then, back then, and this was maybe circa 7-8 years ago, the topics of equity and belonging had not made it into the DEI&B title. So I actually have, sort of, with Verna's permission, expanded her thought and her quote by saying diversity is being asked to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, but belonging is dancing to your favorite song. And you know what that feels like, right? To the degree that if you're at a party, somebody asks you to dance, if you don't like the song, you're actually just going through the motion, and in your mind, you're thinking, I hope this thing ends soon. But when your favorite song comes on, your jam, you're dancing before somebody asks you to. And that's where that personal sense of belonging comes. And then for me, equity is being asked to host the next party. All of us, everyone should have an opportunity to host the party. And then from a, what does DEI&B mean perspective, I'm really speaking about equity of representation, equity of opportunity, equity of compensation, and equity of well-being. This means for all of us. It's not just certain groups, underrepresented groups. It's for all. We all deserve the right to have those equities. So that's sort of the big macro way that I think about it. And at UKG, we actually take that belonging to the next level, where we really believe that our goal is to have every UCRer, we call ourselves UCRer, around our world, to really see that their unique identity, the uniqueness that they bring, their authentic selves, is seen. So it's uniquely you, and it's valued. It's uniquely valued. So we're not there yet. Certainly not everyone feels that way, but that's the ultimate goal that we focus on. And I would aspire that every company should have a goal of where, what's the journey at the end of that journey. And I, quite honestly, I think it's a never-ending journey because human beings are so complex. So now I talked about the, why is it for all? Well, the for all piece is really the fact that this is a business imperative, and the reasons that I would state that, and there's been a lot of correlative leading to causative sort of research around this, is there are things we can't control. And I'm flashing on the screen here just 3 of them around 3 different diversity intersections, that being generationally. The world is changing. The vast majority of the workforce today is made up of a generation that's not mine, the millennial generation. And now as we go to Gen Z, accelerating, and those individuals think, pejoratively at least, think much differently than my generation, certainly my mom's generation and grandparents before her. And they definitely lean into companies, from a hey, who do I spend money with? Who do I engage with? They have voice. Same from a gender perspective, arguably since the beginning of time, depending on one's faith, that you had gender parity, men and women, or people identify as such, but the power dynamic of people who identify as women is accelerating globally to a significant degree. And I have some stats there that show what that spend is even in 2020, and is even far beyond that as we sit here in 22. And then last but not least, globally, ethnic and cultural diversity is a big thing. Ethnic minorities are the largest growing, fastest growing populations on the earth. And certainly in the US, as you think about more underrepresented groups, Black, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, Indigenous American, also vote with their pocketbook. So to that degree, it is incumbent of all of our companies, certainly mine, and I would argue all of yours, where you need to meet people where they are, because they're showing up in a different way. And it's super important that you meet them where they are if you want to have them as partners for life in whatever business that you're hoping to grow moving forward. And as I talked about some of the correlative and causative research, smart people like McKinsey measure such things, and they measure these just a couple of stats here about companies who lean into racial, ethnic, gender diversity, how they outperform companies that don't. 36% is around, sort of 36%, you have a 36% greater chance to outperform your peers if you lean into racial and ethnic diversity. If it's gender, it's 25%. But as important as that bottom number, -29, that's if you don't lean into either just those diversity demographics, you have a 29% chance to underperform. And that's that bottom left quadrant that none of us ever want to be in, because that's not winning. So that's some of the quick thought about, why that's the business case. And then, sort of one last few set of stats here around the corporate culture. Why does corporate culture sort of matter? And there's three different, sort of groups that have measured it. And as you can see, increased employee engagement, productivity, reduced employee turnover. Those are all things that inure benefit to the top line or the bottom line of your company. And certainly in the environment we are in now, whether it's the great resignation, some people believe, I don't believe it to be that. I think it's the great reset. And we all have to adapt to the fact that our employees or prospective employees are thinking about us a little bit differently and evaluating who we are and do they want to spend time with us, which all lean into culture. So culture definitely does matter. So to the degree that it's a business imperative, how do you leverage it, which is this conversation for competitive advantage? And that's what we'll talk about very specifically. Thoughts on that, certainly thoughts based on my experience as a business leader and certainly for the last 6-7 years leading this particular topic. And the first thing you do, there's 3 steps in my mind, is you have to understand that your employees are at a different point within their personal journeys. Now, this is different than many things because we all have human lived experiences, and I arguably no two people are exactly alike. They may look alike, you might presume that they are, you might have similar backgrounds, but on this, it's a personal journey for people, and you have to meet them where they are, and that's for all. Again, not just underrepresented groups, majority groups. You have to meet people where they are and understand that it is going to be a personal journey. And one thing that I've created to articulate that journey from a company perspective, people can do whatever they need to do as individuals, and hopefully those things are the right things, but companies have to show up a little bit different because within your company are all aspects of human beings, and there are different aspects of their journey. So I'll go to the extremes. It's a normal, straight curve there. And there's a group of people, all of our companies, maybe in our families, or I call them the zero-sum game mindset. And that basically at an extreme says, if I give to you, you've taken from me, and therefore I won't let that happen. And I'll use words like meritocracy, or you just need to work harder, or phrases like that, that basically says, hey, everything is fair. And therefore you just have to, if you're not getting your fair share, you need to do something different. Again, I don't believe that. I know that personally not to be true, but there are people in our companies that think that way. So that's the far left. On the far right in this graphic is what I call the extreme activism mindset. And again, from an extreme point of view, those are the folks that may show up to say, regardless of how you show up and you want to be an ally for me, I don't trust you. Your ancestors harmed my ancestors, and therefore I can never trust what you're saying to me. So it doesn't matter what you say. I'd rather sort of separate myself. That's just as dangerous in my mind. I have people in my family like that. You have people in your company as well, where people are just a little bit over-indexed from an activism standpoint. So for me, our belief and my belief for all of you in our companies is our focus needs to be on the influenceable middle, meaning those people who are on a journey from awareness to advocacy. And when I say advocacy, it's not the haves advocating only for the have-nots. It's everyone advocating for everyone. My difference is something that I want to share with you. And your difference is something I want to learn from you. And we both walk away better for it. So I can position myself in understanding you to advocate for you. And I hope you're doing the same thing in your circles. So that's what this implements. So this is that curve. And as a company, we try to stick directly in that influence and trying to work with the influenceable middle. Those other ends, those people exist, but I would not suggest any corporate strategies be optimized for either sides of those ends. That's number one, understanding that people on a personal journey, let's move them from, sort of awareness to advocacy. And we'll talk a bit about the tactics to do that. Second is it's about data. Most people, you can have opinions, but if they're not backed by facts, the vast majority of people won't move with you. It's just, if it's always a nice feel-good thing, people will only do nice things up to a point, and that's the point that they've deemed it nice enough. But if you have data to back, like some of the data I shared there, it's super important. And in this particular area of business, there's both quantitative, which is normally in the diversity of your representation. Globally, people identify as female and male. In the US, where we measure ethnicity, so the underrepresented groups typically, in tech, Asian is more dominant than not, but if you think of broader industry, Asian, people identify as Black, African American, or people identify as Hispanic, Latino are the ways you measure representation. And here are some of ours. We're on our journey now. Certainly would love to have quality, given the world is pretty much 50-50 from a gender perspective. And we actually are doing relatively well, but I was raised in a family where a C or a B isn't good enough. So if we're going to say our purpose is people and we're UKG, we will do significantly better. So that's one way to measure. But as important, regardless of what your representation looks like in your company, what you should try to improve, because it drives greater innovation and employee engagement and retention, is what is that experience of those individuals? And at every company I've been at, I've picked a set of qualitative measurements. And here is an example of some of the questions we ask in our yearly survey. And we measure how are we moving in these, and how do we measure against an industry. And as you can see here, we're moving in a good direction. The March survey, and then we had in September survey. Actually, this was last September. We just did another survey that just closed about a month ago. We're analyzing, and we are moving in the right direction. But here's some of the questions that I would submit that you should be checking on as well, because not everyone in your company is probably having the same experience across these types of questions, which are super important. And as you well know, if you don't feel like you belong and you're not comfortable being yourself, and you don't have great trust, and you don't think your manager supports you, and you don't think promotions are made fairly, what are the chances that if you think about how you would answer these, there's a great chance if you answered negative or not so positive in these, that you probably are looking for another opportunity elsewhere. So that's why it's important to keep a pulse on both of those and to analyze these questions very intersectionally, not just men and women, but from a US perspective, how did Asian women versus men answer the question? Black, Hispanic men and women answer versus white men and women. And you'll start to see that people aren't necessarily experiencing the company the way you want it to equitably be experienced. And that's where you'll have your strategies and tactics. So that's number two. Now, getting to number three is then you obviously, like any other thing of import in your company, you want to have strategies and tactics. And that's why I said, as an engineer, that's how I think about this. You need to operationalize what you're doing based on what you know. And this is the hardest part of the journey. Well, having a point of view is hard, but then, what do you do next? And what I would offer to you is this, again, based on experience, based on the great companies in industry that I've observed, I've put together and wanted to share with you what I believe to be a success framework. You don't have to have this entire framework. Hopefully these elements of this framework are valuable, and I'll give you examples of each one, at least from a UKG perspective, so you'll know they're just not words. So the three areas, and we call them, sort of pillars, are, first, you need to establish this as a global business imperative. If you're a global company, definitely this makes sense. Even if you aren't, your customer base is global in their mindset. So you need to sort of embed this in every way you do your business. Then we're going to talk about building that operational framework, which is the rigor that you have in every other great part of your business. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to scale for success, because you want a foundation that you can scale out on. So in the first pillar there, the examples that I'll give is, number one, that narrative. Not a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. A lot of people believe it's a US thing. No, it is a global thing. And there are examples of, when we start thinking about what an underrepresented group is versus not, even in arguably more homogenous societies. Like I've spent a lot of time in Asia. You have, there is a difference between, let's say in China, if you went to a city school somewhere in Shanghai or Beijing, or you went to a rural school, and some of that bias that we'll talk about that creeps in, you'll start to see, well, companies will start hiring from one group or another, as an example. Or in Asia, also in India. I mean, there is, there has been, and for a significant part of time, there was a caste system that shows up a little bit. The stratification socioeconomically, it shows up different there than it may show up in the US, as an example. So you need to tune all of your strategies and tactics. Think globally, but execute locally and in languages that people understand. I would submit, and we do it here, that this needs to be not something you do, but who you are. And at UKG, we actually weave this into our company. Again, our purpose is people, we're in human capital management, workforce management. It's a very natural thing to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we engage customers in a number of activities that you see on your screen there. The goal to be, hey, we're not perfect at it, but we want to share who we are on this deep level. If we're asking you to be a partner for life, customer for life with us, And we want to learn from you as well. And this is the learning at the people level. So having something in your company where you're driving it into your normal business motions, all of our sales reps leverage this as a wedge and as a differentiation just from technology. So that's one suggested thing. And then of course, we're very fortunate as being a company that develops products, is we drive this deeply into our product. And I'm very blessed to be at a company, and why I left Dell to come here, to be able to take some of this thought leadership and instantiate it into product. So why is that important? So we can help our customers accelerate. And our acquisition of Great Place to Work, which is I'm at their conference here in Florida, helps us do that, because they've surveyed, they know everything about what makes a great place to work, because they certify companies as such from big to small. And we take that logic and other thought leadership logic and drive it into product, which we are announcing in about a month to the rest of the world. So it's a new product platform with all these goodies in it. But that's another way that we drive it into our rhythm. And again, I would encourage all of you to think about how can this be leveraged, because you're doing business with all of those varying diversity demographics, as I spoke about a few minutes ago. So that's number one, establishing that business imperative. It's who you are, not what you do. Number two, which is arguably the biggest and hardest thing to do, is how do you move this topic into its natural scaling motion? And in most companies, the natural scaling motion for people is in the HR group. And so aligning and having strategies that drive and are embedded into your existing HR operational motions. I have an example here of what we do. So from where you recruit talent, to how you engage to hire that talent, to how you onboard that talent, to how you ensure that first 90-day experience is phenomenal, to how you develop them as they promote and have upward mobility, and hopefully they stay with your company and become great, sort of alumni at the end. This topic is in all of it. You have to have that lens, because people cross all of those intersections. So that's super important. The other thing is in your HR motion, if you all are doing pay equity or what have you, having that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging lens and how you show up. We happen to, sort of be developing as we speak a bunch of thought leadership around pay equity. And it's showing up in our commercials, it's showing up in our partnerships, it's showing up everywhere, because you just can't say pay equity if you don't understand the complexities that, again, with pay, not all people make the same. And in fact, that stat shows there that people identify women make 18 cents less than men on the dollar, even in today's society where we have so much focus on equitable parity. And then, another example is if your recruiting motion. We actually have a recruiting motion if we need more underrepresented groups by our goals that I'll show in a second. Then you establish deep relationships with places where this demographic exists. And here's an example of what we're doing with our historical Black colleges and universities and minority serving institutions, where we're teaching in the classroom. We're not just showing up to recruit. We're actually showing and trying to provide value to give us some differentiation. So that's an example of moving it into your HR motion, that last one being around talent acquisition. No company what gets measured gets done. Michael Dell drove that into my brain for the 3 years I had the privilege of working for him, and he's absolutely right. And I think it's super important and a best practice to not only have goals internally, but to be transparent to the world. Why is that? Once you're transparent, you hold yourselves accountable, because you shouldn't say anything you're not willing to do. And these goals themselves over some period of time, this is our horizon for 2026, need to be real, not just aspirational. First thing people say, well, why is it only 46%? Well, we have a large percentage for us for 2026. We're actually going to beat that one. We're at 46 now. But when we did these goals over a year ago, a lot of our hiring plans were in India. And in India, we were only 26% of people identified as female. And if we were going to continue to hire a large amount of people in India, everyone that wasn't 46 was going to be dilutive. So that's how we got at 46. These are real. We will update them. And as you'll see, they're not only for everyone in the workforce, but also for leadership, because you want linearity. You don't want all of the diverse demographic to be at the bottom of your organization. People want to see people throughout the leadership levels. So that's very, very important. Then you need governance. So scorecards we have for our leaders. We have governance, and in our company, and I would suggest for you, you need the top and most visible leaders to lean into this, not just by words, but by actions. Because if you put them on a, sort of, and like we have this, you'll see our CEOs there and many other of our senior executives, and have them lead, these are the people who are doing the majority of hiring in your company. So whatever way you're stratified, we've got 15,000 people, whether you're 500 people, you need the most senior people, not only to lean in, but to model the behavior of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And that will accelerate because the people will see that, that the company really is leaning in. And though I know we're sort of a little on time, if you have a broader ESG initiative, environmental, social, and governance, which includes your volunteering and your philanthropic work, that's a super important thing as well. And by the way, your investors, if you happen to be a public company, your investors care very deeply, whether it's the individual or, like us, we have private equity in us, they care very deeply about who you are, not just what you are doing. And last but not least, and so that's that operationalization. So again, establish, make it part of who you are as a company and your natural motion, make it part of all your internal motions and hold yourself accountable. Then the last is arguably the first two are top down. The last is bottoms up. How do you empower all of your people in your organization to be on their journey, to accelerate their journeys? Well, number one is for us, is to have foundational learning. Some people call it training. I don't like training. Training is very compliant in nature. When I do training, I'm like trying to get through it quickly so I can check the box. When I'm learning, I get deeper into it and I'm on that journey. And so we have a platform we call Unified. It's our foundational learning around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And why is this important? We want everyone to understand the topics, like when we're having these family discussions, if you would, it'd be good that we all understand what these things mean. What is unconscious bias? It's brain science. Everybody has it as a human being. What's a microaggression? You'll hear it, yes, like aggression there. Is that bad? Or no, we do them all the time. One simple one that'll happen almost every day. And if I'm not doing it myself, I hear someone do it. Walk into a room, start a meeting and said, hey guys, how are you doing? Well, number one, not everyone in that room would identify as a guy or, or as a girl, if you would, in a non-binary manner. So just by doing that simple thing, you didn't mean it, but someone didn't hear themselves in that room. They give you, they'll give you grace and not call you out on it. But that's an example of a microaggression that happens pretty much. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, saying, yeah, I do that all the time. Belonging, equity, sort of belonging, diversity, equity, inclusion. What do they mean? How they show up in society, how they show up in your personal life, those type of things. Privilege and inequity. I didn't say white privilege. We all are, in fact, being on this call, we're very privileged. I'm very privileged. Someone wanted to wake up this morning that didn't. So we need to understand privilege and inequities and how they show up outside of work, how they show up inside of work, and how do we lean, if you think of privilege as a superpower. I love the Avengers. I know Sean's on here too, the Avenger guy. How do you use it as a superpower on behalf of others, right? All of us have power, but how do you use it on behalf of others? And that's the privilege that you do have. Next, employee resource groups. No matter what size company, there are a set of people in your company who this topic is resonating very deeply with. And the great company, what they do is they sort of lean into that and let those flip the script, let those people help you lead. We happen to have 8 of them across a number of diversity intersections, from Fire Up, which is dominant people who identify as women, Adapt, people who are differently abled there, Pride, people who identify in a non-binary way, LGBTQ+, Unidos, that's people from the Hispanic or the Latin diaspora, Aspire, the Asian diaspora, Build, the Black diaspora, Cares. We have a unique one that started around people who are taking care of people with cancer, but is now expanded to people, families, and people who take care of all people, families in need, and then vets are our 8. But they're not just focused on community. This isn't just a fun thing and impacting your community. We leverage those people and their passion in our innovation, and they can be professionally developed there, and certainly in the team member experience, to the degree that you are representing the company, and that shows up in that qualitative. Do I feel like I belong? Do I get to impact the company? Am I important? Do they see me? Do I belong? So that's an important thing. And again, you can start an ERG at any size company, and I would suggest you do, and then allow those people to put their fingerprints on your culture. And then last but not least, for those who really show up and show out in that particular area, and if you do grow your ERGs significantly, you can have that next layer. We happen to have a formal ambassador program, and these folks are an extension of my team. The first cohort, we just launched this a couple of months ago, is 94 people who, they're getting certified. There is a high bar to be an ambassador for the company and to be able to speak about this on behalf of the company. But those people are elevated in, not only what they're doing outside of this topic, but they become the face of our company. And I would say, as well as you evolve, depending on where you are, taking that next step, ERGs are great, but also having ambassadors in your company. So Karen, I know I sped through that a little bit, but I would love if there's time, if we have how we're doing here. Yes, I think we do have a little bit of time for questions. Happy to answer any there or double click on any of the points that I've shared there.
You did great on time. Thank you, Brian. We really appreciate you speaking with us today. So if you guys don't mind, I'll kick us off with a question. So you're working for an organization that's very supportive of these initiatives.
Yes.
So I would imagine that the buy-in, was a little bit easier for you than it might be for others, because we know that not all companies are equally as enlightened.
Yes.
So what would your advice be to those on the call who are working for some of those less enlightened companies? What can they do that would be the most impactful to try to get the leadership teams on board?
Yeah, so this is the one. So, and I'll go back, I'll flip back to the slides of this is where I'm speaking specifically in the, pillar one here. The reason why I found that people, there's not one reason, there's like, I'll give you three that people may feel that their leaders aren't enlightened. Number one, if the leaders believe, number one, they may not have life experiences that resonate greatly with some of these diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging intersections. So for them, they view this topic as that's for somebody else, right? So I don't get it. It's great for you, and you'll hear things like, yeah, I definitely support you being who you are, but we're a business. So they've separated church and state in their mind, that it's like that's for you outside, but the business of our ex company is to drive value for our customers and to drive sort of profit and revenue. Well, here's the truth of it, and I spoke about earlier. Those things are inexorably tied together. It's impossible if your customers are changing around you. Number one, they are also, and they're the way they look and evaluate whether you're a great vendor or partner for them is, do they see themselves? Do you understand their culture? That touches the business. So speaking about this in business terms changes the game. If you actually speak to these folks about the power of this topic and how we're showing up, for our customers in a better way, because that's their expectation, then the folks who are I care deeply about that. So that's number one. Number two, we know, Karen, that this is all about talent. Talent wins. Unless you are a company who's of robots who make sort of other robots, we're in the people business, and to win, you need to attract the best talent. The best talent, if you're only looking very myopically at just one type of person, you will not innovate. And by the way, you'll run out of that demographic, especially when, as I showed earlier, the world is evolving across many different diversity dimensions. So talent wins, and your leaders will understand that. Well, and why? I can send you articles on diverse talent, greater innovation, employee engagement, employee retention, things that inure benefits to the top and bottom line of the companies. Your leaders will care greatly about that as well. And retaining talent as well, because people won't hang around if they don't answer those questions in a manner that you want to. And last but not least, it comes back to this ESG point, and I will click on it since we have a minute here, is the way you're being assessed by not only your customers, but by your investors is much differently. And ESG is here. There are many companies who value, there's an index tied, whether it's environmental, how you think about the climate, whether it's social, which we're talking about here, philanthropic activities, your supplier diversity, and whether it's governance, how do you actually operate your company, where if I trust you, what are you doing with the information that I give? So all of those topics are important. And I would submit that you need to flip the script to present an opportunity to your leaders that they can see themselves in, and not think of this again as a nice thing to do, because only people do nice things up to a point. That makes sense, Karen?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that we see in relation to the talent is that based off of studies that we conducted with Harvard, is that cognitively diverse teams outperform all others as well. So that's just another lens of diversity, which is the one that we focus on. So.
No, and absolutely, Karen. I mean, it just because somebody looks like you, having someone with a different lived experience that might look like you is phenomenal in a room. So I'm not saying, for those companies who may not have all of the diversity demographics that we spoke about, there is difference. There's no two people on the earth that are exactly the same. And I would suggest that having, sort of the cognitive, as you said, put somebody in the room who will challenge you. I mean, the best ideas will be when you have multiple ideas and then, you sort of rumble and come up with something that was better than any of the individual ones. So even again, if you don't have some of the, whether it's gender or race and ethnicity or identity or ability, even if we're more, just sort of, it was more unique, and at least in what you can see, make sure that people that you have in the room think much differently, or again, you probably won't out innovate your competition.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a question from the audience. What is a concrete example of making an employee feel empowered or a sense of belonging without feeling like you're harping on differences? And they go on to say, we have a single African-American employee in a small company. To ask, do you feel valued as a Black woman in this company seems more divisive than inclusive.
Well, number one, don't presume that the person doesn't want to be asked that question. But to the degree, as I said earlier, that like it's really the discomfort of the majority speaking the minority. And again, as a Black male, I can definitely speak to this. Is I know that there are people who feel as though they will, if they ask me certain questions in a certain way, they're going to ask it wrong. And then they are believing in they're planning that this is the conversation they have in their head. And if I do it wrong, Brian's going to think I'm misogynist or racist or some combination or this or that. And so most people, because someone is different and they don't know how to approach them, they just don't do it at all because they think it's going to be more negative than not. And that person doesn't want to get called out. So number one, if you have in your, sort of, and hopefully whoever asked the question, you all have an employment survey. And if you had some questions in that survey that, you can ask that speak to the belongingness, does someone belong or not? People will answer those things very, very, because it didn't say who it is, because all of your surveys are probably, anonymous like ours are. You don't know who answered the question, but you do know, and I'll go back to so you can see some of those questions, but you'll start to see. And then if you start to analyze it in this particular case, you might not be able to, it's one, if it's only one person in your group, but you can start to see that number one, it's not only her, I bet there'll be other in your example, other people in your company that aren't experienced in the company as you might believe that they are. So I lean into it. And that's where a lot of this foundational learning is. So if you want to if you impress everyone in your company, have a curriculum around where we're all learning the same things. What does this mean? Because you don't have to target this particular individual, but I can guarantee you that this individual, if they knew that your company was trying to understand and trying to be a place for all, where people do feel like they belong, and you can't get there if you're not speaking about bias. You can't get there if you don't know what a microaggression is. You can't get there if you can't have an intellectually honest conversation about the privileges that we all have. If you have that environment, that person is going to know that you're willing to see them at some point without them having to tell and teach you everything. So I hope whoever asked that question is a great question, but lean into the conversation. Don't fear it.
Yes, and I unfortunately I can only see part of their name. So guys, when you're entering something in Q&A, if you could just type what your name is, if you'd like for me to say that.
Teresa Lane, I think, is on this
Lane.
one.
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
Thank you, Teresa. Great question. Great question. Don't lean. It's like leaning. You got to lean into the danger, but a lot of people don't, because you're right. It's hard. I talked about that personal journey. You don't want to say the wrong thing, but if you can have these conversations in a spirit of trust. In fact, I start a conversation with someone that I don't understand by saying, I humbly am asking you this. I know I might say something wrong. So if I do, please correct me. But I promise you, if you teach me the right thing, I will then tell 10 friends and so on. And now you've empowered, you've humbly come forward and you've empowered them, hopefully that they trust you enough to tell you the truth. And then you're taking action on that in your own community. And that person, because most underrepresented groups, they don't want to have to teach every time. They want you to, they'll tell you, but they want you to learn, and they would love for you to show up in your own community as an ally for them as well from what you learn.
You've implemented many programs at multiple organizations at this point. Can you share a personal story without maybe naming any names of something that you've seen as far as changing someone's life? Or I'm sure you've got many of these stories, but are there any that stand out for you?
It does. Early on in Dell, it was actually my second week in Dell. We had some foundational learning there. It's different. It's a program called MARC, Many Advocating Real Change. Actually, it was called Men Advocating Real Change, and I changed the name 2 weeks after because it wasn't just about men and women. That felt to the last question that you were putting you at odds groups of people. And I was like, many advocating real change. And I sat through because I wanted to observe, how, and it was a day session, it's about 6-hour session, a lot of activities, group activities, individual, things and learning, and you listen. And I watched one individual. This individual was from England. This gentleman, middle-aged gentleman, probably in his 50s. And his, I don't know if you can see me, during the entire, every session that was going on, he looked very unhappy, physically, the face there. And I was thinking, okay, this is something I want to test what's going on in this person's head. So at the end of it, at the end of the MARC session, there's something where you actually want to go around and they ask you if you have a commitment, are you willing to share with the group, what that commitment is. And as they were, and we do it in pairs, you don't have to do it with the group, but share it with someone else. And so I purposely went to this gentleman and said, okay, I said, sir, you looked a little uncomfortable. I'm the new, chief diversity officer here. And I want to, you really understand, did this training or did MARC not hit the mark? Sort of contradict the term there. It's funny. And he goes, no, actually it did. And I said, well, what was going on in your head? And he was like, I was sitting there, and as I kept hearing these stories, number one, half the things that they were talking about, I do every day. But then it hit me. He goes, I have 2 daughters, and I didn't realize, I've never asked them how they were experiencing this world. And now I know that the world that they're experiencing is so negative. I've never taken the time. And so he goes, I'm pissed at myself. I think I'm a bad father. I think I'm a bad husband. And I was like, wait. Nope. That's not what this is. It's do me this favor. This was like a Wednesday, Thursday. When you get back to England, call me the next week and tell me talk to your family. And so I get a call about the Tuesday, and he goes, that was amazing. I shut my family down and I told him what I learned here. And I told him, I think I've been a bad husband and a bad, father. And they were like, no, Dad, you love us, but we didn't think you cared about such things. So we never talked about it. But the fact that you approached us and you want to talk about this, you're the best dad and husband ever. And they were on their journey from there. And then the next day after that, he scrapped a staff meeting and he, sort of said, all of you have to go on this training. This is what I learned. He started leading as an inclusive leader. So that was one of the more impactful things, Karen, because I saw what I thought was someone just visually, again, that might've been my bias, physical, that he was uncomfortable. It actually was a moment where that topic landed personally. Forget what he was going to do at work. He's going to be a better leader, but he wanted to be a better father and a better husband for his family because he didn't want his daughters or his wife to experience what he was hearing they were probably experiencing every day.
We have a question from Wayne.
Sure.
And he asked, in the DEI&B space, is there use of the growing happiness, and then it was in quotations, happiness, positive neuroplasticity studies data, and science, including someplace as another way to help make a workplace a place to be and grow. And he had a follow-up to that saying, in my question, I'm referring to work along the lines of people like Rick Hansen and many others.
Yeah, so happiness is an interesting, sort of concept. So no, great question. Wayne is very, you're very well read. And Karen, I almost defer to you. So happy, I mean, it's a triggering word. It's like, what makes someone happy, right? Content. And maybe the next speaker can speak to it. I do believe that's where belonging ties in for me. It's like when you are most settled, I'll come back to belonging, and I gave the dance example, but when you go to a meeting and you're invited to a meeting, maybe you have a little joy to that, and maybe you've never been invited to this meeting before and somebody invites you. So you have a little bit, you go through this, well, that's a good thing, and whatever, the endorphins are happening. Then nobody asks your opinion in the meeting. You aren't given an opportunity to contribute in any way. And then you leave that meeting. Do you feel any different? In some cases, like, why in the hell, did I ever get invited? Then you get to the other side of that. So that's one scenario, and that happens a lot. People just invite you and they think that was enough. So that's inclusion. But the belonging part comes from, if you feel as though you were invited and you were valued, and you got to contribute. And even if they didn't go with your idea, you got to debate it and all that, and you heard the other point of view. I think there's a level of satisfaction that you walk out with, and you want more of that. So I think this whole, what is happy or not, again, the work there, I probably have to do some diligence, but there's something about being settled and being yourself and not having to cover, not having to conform, and to be valued. That's what we call it, uniquely you, uniquely valued, that I would think is settled in that. So there's something happening in your head where you're in the state, and maybe it is happiness, contentness, belonging is where I go with it, at least in the work that I have. I think those are all related, but I'd love to hear another point of view.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, of course, I think about with the 5 dynamics and your energies. It's when you're allowed to be yourself and you're valued for being yourself.
Yes.
And so in corporate America in particular, we've worshiped at the altar of high execute for way too long.
Yeah.
And we've done that, and we've shut down maybe high explorer. And so that shuts down innovation and creativity, or we've shut down inclusiveness, which then leads to disengaged workforces, or we shut down, really being rigid and focused on our data analysis. And so we valued one thing over another. But once we start to see that it takes all energies to be successful, to have the highest levels of success and satisfaction, I feel like that's when people are happier at work. So.
Yeah. And Karen, you and I, just for the group, I skipped over real quick because I wanted to get into the presentation where, Karen and I did a lot of work with thousands of people at SAP as we travel around the world, and what that took to get people, like when we were in France, Karen, and when we were in Israel. I mean, it was different, every group. And I know some of it was stressful because people were showing up. They didn't believe this, they didn't want to, but the vast majority of the group that I had the privilege of being the COO for, it brought them to another level because they didn't, number one, realize that they were over-indexed at execute, as we were, many companies are. I'm over-indexed at times, as you know how I show up, Karen. But by having an open mind and understanding without putting aspersions on some personality thing, but understanding how someone else works, it just opened up a whole new level of creativity in the group, and we delivered some products across sports and healthcare and retail that we would not have been able to do if we didn't have all the voices and everybody bringing their unique gifts to the table. So,
thank you. We might have time for one final question. If there's another question for Brian.
I think I want to meet Wayne and Teresa. I love that. Follow up there. I'll have a slide on there. I'd love to. Those are great questions. Those next level questions in my mind.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if we don't have any other questions, and just as a reminder to those who may have joined us late, the Q&A portion of the Zoom is open. So if you do have a question, be sure to put it in the question and answer space, and we will share that with the speakers today. So Brian, thank you so much for leading us off. It's going to be a great day, and we know that you have many other things to do, but we appreciate you sharing of your time with us.
Thank you, everyone, and anything for you, Karen and crew. Again, you changed my life, and professionally, and in some ways personally, with introducing this wonderful, sort of, I don't even know what to call it. It's a gift. That's what I'll call this gift. You've given me a gift that it helped me expand my career, and I hope you have a wonderful summit, everyone.
Well, thank you, Brian.
You. Take care, everyone. Enjoy.
All right.